The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining the webinar today, delivering a gold standard session, Speaking Tips to Implement Immediately. This is in preparation for your MGMA presentation next week at the annual. I'd like to share with you one of my favorite quotes. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. I like this quote so much I put it on my business cards. And really, what does that mean? I think it means that we are, as we educate, we are not just trying to fill people up with information. We are not just trying to fill that bucket, but we are trying to ignite something in them and inspire something in them. It could be a new practice. It could be a new way of doing things. It could be a new way to think, sort of a paradigm shift of thinking. But it's that we're doing more than simply filling them with information. We are connecting the dots, we're lighting a fire, we're inspiring, and we're getting them and giving them a call to action. So what we're going to talk about today is a few things. And think about this. Are your participants always engaged when you present to them? Is there energy in the room, the kind of energy that you can feel, that positive energy, or does the room feel flat? Do learners walk away with immediate, actionable items? So can they walk off and do something pretty much the next day or even in the next hour? And have you given them a dose of inspiration? Even though we are not necessarily inspirational speakers, every presentation should have a dose of inspiration. And that doesn't mean it's a evangelistic type of a dose of inspiration, but it should be something that helps people understand that they've got it within them to do whatever it is you're advocating that they do, that they have the skills, the intellect, the ability to actually get this done. So how do you do that? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. My name is Deborah Zavladil, and I'm the president and CEO of the Learning Studio. I am working with MGMA on a couple of projects right now, but one is really a Train the Trainers project, which is what we're doing now. I've been doing a couple of webinars and some individual Skype interviews that I'm still offering up to any speakers that are going in next week, where people are doing about 20 minutes of their presentation, and I'm giving them ideas on how maybe to modify things and improve things just a little bit. And then Monday and Tuesday at the conference in Nashville, I will be at the Speaker Ready Room at 7:30, and I'll be doing sort of top 10 tips, which will be a little bit different than what I'm doing right now. And it will be top tips that you can use immediately. So if your session is that day, there's going to be 10 things that you can put into practice immediately and improve your presentation and your connection with the audience. So my company focuses on this almost exclusively, on adult learning, on membership organizations, on how to make presentations, how to make them good, training and development, leadership, all of those kinds of things. So this is something that I feel very passionately about, and I feel like I have so learned many things along the way that have improved my ability to present and my ability to connect with my audiences. So I love it when I can pass those interesting things on to other people as well. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about some very easy tips and instructional techniques that will help you as you get to the stage next week, how to connect with an adult learner, and classroom tips and exercises to engage an audience. So what we want, right, at the end of the day is we want to engage those learners. We don't want them sitting there, again, like blank slates where we're just filling a bucket. We want to connect with them. We want to inspire them. We want them to be thinking about what we're talking about and maybe the process or the product or the application and how it can be implemented in their own unique circumstances and in their own culture and organization. I love this infographic Because first of all, what you're going to learn from this infographic is that graphics really help individuals remember and retain information. So if you see right where the eye is on the infographic, adding visual aids to a presentation increases retention from 14% to 38%. And you may think 14%, that sounds really low. Well, it does. Absolutely it does. But most presentations made, 14% of what is offered and what is given is actually remembered. So as you think about your presentation, wouldn't you rather be up at 38% than 14, or even more than that? You know, if you really employ a lot of what we're going to talk about today, visuals and interactive exercises and anecdotes and storytelling, you probably can see the 38% jump up to 75% or higher. If we look up at the top, an instructor generally says 100 to 200 words a minute, and the student only hears half of those. So if you're speaking 200 words, a student is hearing 100. So what does that mean? I think what it means is not that you want to say as many words as possible, but what it means is there is some strategy that is probably pretty effective around repeating messages. So if there's a theme, or if there is a statement, or if there is a call to action that you want to make sure people hear, you want to drop that in and tie it in probably at several different points in your presentation. Not just once, not just at the beginning, and not just at the end, but throughout. So I'm sure you've heard people that are, you know, great speakers that will have a theme, and they may say, you know, the theme may be live each day like it's your last. And they may tell a story at the beginning, and then they may say, live each day like it's your last. Then they may show statistics about, you know, all the things that can kill you in a day, and they may say, live each day like it's your last. And then they may, at the very end with that statement. So it doesn't have to be around something like that. It can be around, you know, running a group practice. It can be around IT issues. Whatever that is that you feel is a really important element of the program, something that you want them to remember, drop it in more than once as you're doing the program. A typical lecture, students are attentive only 40% of the time. Attentive. Now remember, attentive 40% and retain 14%. So we absolutely want to mix this up. We do not want to be someone, quote, lecturing. Even to hear that term sort of makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because a lecture to me indicates that the audience isn't involved, that it's more about the person on the stage than it is the people in the room trying to learn. And I think, you know, you may have heard the term, student-centered learning, or, you know, learning-centered education, but it really needs to be about the learner. And, you know, a picture may not be 1,000 words, but it really helps. So as you think about your presentation, you may already have it set. You may not have the ability to add visuals. If you can, great. If you can't, think about it next time. But do think about how you will speak to the presentation, and whether there should be themes that are repeated, and how do you keep those students engaged? How do you keep them engaged, and how do you get them to way higher than the average of 14% retention? So I ask you, do you want this, or this, or do you want this, or this? Those are engaged learners, right? I think we would all agree that those are engaged learners. That's what we want. We want to make sure that people are engaged every step of the way, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that. And I believe that when you go into a classroom, you hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst. Should you ever get a group, you may have a time slot that's after lunch, you may have an early time slot, you know, the morning after a big gala event the night before. You never know just what you're going to find with your learners when they come into the room. So while you prepare for them to be to have a lot of energy and be engaged. I would always have a few things in my hip pocket just in case they're not, to make sure they're engaged, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. So here's a few tips. Think about your preparation. So we're a week out from the annual meeting or a little bit less. Now is the time you should be thinking about these things. Your demographics. What are the likely demographics of your attendees? Will they be millennials? Will they be baby boomers? Will they be seasoned? Will they not? Will they represent the full geography of North America? Will they not? Will you have international individuals at your program? How homogeneous will they be? Will there be a mix of generations, years of experience? What I always like to know when I go into a classroom is, who is the learner? One thing that I will say that I repeat over and over in my seminars is know your audience. It doesn't matter if it's an audience of one that you're having a presentation with, or coffee with, or a lunch, a prospective client, or a prospective physician that you're looking to get into your team, prospective nurse, whomever. Doesn't matter if it's a presentation to a board or a presentation in front of 5,000 people. What can you discern about your audience without having a lot of information? What do you know? You can think about their demographics a little bit. You can also think about, based on what you have put in the brochure, what are they coming to your presentation to learn? This is something that's so easy that there's such a big disconnect on, I find, is that when we send in our presentation outlines and our bullet points that we want in the brochure, it might be 8 months prior to the conference, and we don't go back and revisit what's actually in the brochure. So people coming to your classroom want to hear what is printed in the brochure, and if you are not careful about that, you may end up missing a point or two. I was just on a Skype call with someone 2 days ago who was running through his presentation, and it was very good, but we realized that he completely forgot to address one of the points that was in the brochure. So it was one of those moments of clarity where he quickly realized that he needed to add those points, so that, obviously it's truth in advertising, and you're going to have people upset if they don't get what they came for. Also, have you said anything when this has been marketed about who should attend? Is this a more senior type of an audience that you're looking to attract, or that you've said should come to the program, or there are people that you feel need sort of a prerequisite to the program, and will they have it? Have you ever given them any pre-reading or anything along those lines, which I think is very tricky, because you sometimes have people that come that have done it and sometimes people that don't. But really, as much as you can know about your audience is really, really important. So know that audience. And again, I know that you probably don't have, a deck of demographics on who's going to the MGMA conference, but you probably have some idea of who's going to be there if you've been there before, and how alike some folks are. And I would absolutely, as you're thinking about how you're going to start your presentation, if you don't know some of these things, feel free to ask those questions at the front end of the presentation through a raise of hands, or have people stand up and sit down. If they, you can say, how many of you have been in this profession, 2 years or more? Everyone stands up. How many 5 years or more? Some people sit down. How many 8 years or more? Other people sit down. How many, between 10 or over 10? Some sit down. How many over 20? And then by the end, you can see who are the, the more long-standing members, etc. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I'd want to know right at the beginning as much as I can if I have any questions. And then the key is to be nimble enough to adapt to it. So if you feel like your presentation is only talking about those who have a great deal of experience, and yet you find out 50% of the room is 0 to 5 years of experience, what can you do as you're going through your presentation to point out well, this is true for those that have great experience, but if you don't have as much experience, this is what I would recommend that you think about. Or saying something along the lines of, one of the things that you should know is whether you have a lot of experience or not, this is not a difficult concept to grasp, or this is not a difficult process to implement. So you should all be able to, do this kind of a thing. You want to establish rapport. So now we're at the event, right? You're walking into your room, your seminar room. There might be some people already there that are early birds to your session, but they're going to be straggling in as you're up in front getting ready. And what I always like to do is introduce myself at least to 3 or 4 people, sort of sitting in the front or walk the room a little bit. Why? Because by sitting in the room early and by being in the room when you're not yet presenting, you have an opportunity to connect with people already. So walk up to them, introduce yourself to them. What will end up happening is you will make immediate friends in your audience. So if you're at all nervous, I think this is one of the best ways to diffuse nervousness, is to get to know, even for 30 seconds, a few people sitting at the front that you're going to be looking at as you're presenting, even though your eyes are going to be moving around the room, but you have some friends in the audience already. I guarantee you those are the people that will be nodding their head when you're talking, smiling at you, and giving you lots of positive nonverbal feedback. So make a couple of friends right when you get into the room. The other thing I just quickly mentioned that I want to talk about as well is eye contact. It is really important to have eye contact with the audience. So even if you have to glance down at the PowerPoint or glance at a note, be sure to look up as often as you can and for as long as you can. And don't simply pick 1 or 2 or 3 people to have eye contact with. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a presentation like that. I have. I've been in a presentation where I've unfortunately been one of those people that the instructor decides to have eye contact with the entire session. And I know it was because I made them feel comfortable, but it's awkward for the rest of the room. It was awkward for me. I didn't want to have eye contact and be at that kind of rapt attention with the speaker the entire time. And what it does is it shuts out the rest of the room. So what I always say is, look at those people that are smiling at you, but make sure you are looking around the room and you're going, whether it's from left to right or right to left. When you're talking and making points, your head should be turning basically the circumference of the room, and you should be taking everyone in. How big is your audience? So this is something that you likely won't know until the day of the event, which is, can be a little unnerving for people. But I want to tell you in just a few minutes how to make the best of it, whether you have 10 people show up or 100 people or 500 people show up. There are benefits to a really small audience, and there are benefits to a really big audience. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, adjust along the way. If you feel like you have asked questions and you're finding out that there's a difference in how people are perceiving your information or how they're going to use your information, or that they are from different practice settings that you feel you need to be more inclusive about, do that. Hopefully you are comfortable enough as you're up there in the front of the room to make sure that you are including people. What I like to do when I meet people, as I go into the room early, is also, either sometimes use their name in the presentation or use their facility in the presentation, only if we're talking positively, of course. But, we can say, a practice in Marietta, Georgia, or, so you can reference some of the locations and some of the information that you've gleaned from some of the audience, and people really seem to connect with that. And then gauge the mood that day. Is it light? Is it serious? The only reason I bring this up is that it is usually the instructor's job, the facilitator's job, to keep a really positive mood in the classroom. But you should also be aware of what's going on in the world. I remember a group I was working with had a big presentation the day after 9/11. Well, that would have been a very awkward day to be very jovial and joking around and have the wrong demeanor. So the show went on, but the mood needed to be a little more serious that day. And this is not a political endorsement. This is just a something that I'd like you to think about. I think about when Hillary Clinton went from being a candidate during the last election to becoming Secretary of State. And what I noticed in her was, obviously when she was on the campaign trail, as she's doing now, she's trying to be liked and likable and sitting in coffee houses and laughing with people and eating pie and smiling and seeming acceptable. The day she was appointed as Secretary of State of the United States, her demeanor completely changed, because it would have been inappropriate as the Secretary of State to have that demeanor in the types of conversations talking about the types of heavy issues she was talking about. So her demeanor went from being very lighthearted to very serious. Her face changed. Her body language changed. And it was because of really the types of issues she was dealing with and what she was talking about. And to me, that was a very stark example of someone that is very in tune with what was needed in that particular situation and took on the right demeanor. And it was almost like a light switch overnight. But, you know, that's what politicians are good at, I guess. But, you know, again, I would just say think about that. If you ever happen to be in a situation where you're presenting and either something has happened on the world stage that's been very serious, or something has happened in your industry that's been very serious, or you know you're walking into a room of people that are very anxious about a particular topic or subject, just make sure that your attitude and your delivery hits the mood. So size of audience. If you happen to be in a room and only 10 people show up, what I really hope you're not going to do is say, wow, I guess you're the only 10 people that are interested in this topic. We don't want to do that. What we really want to do is we want to make sure that you have your game face on. That if you have 10 people show up, you are thrilled to have 10 people show up. You know, and again, this is part of being in the public eye. It is, you know, there's not a little quasi comparison to being a politician. You put your game face on. You don't say, oh my gosh, I can't believe we only have 10 people. Well, I was planning on 200, so now I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not sure how we're going to handle. You put your game face on. You say, wow, this is fantastic. Let's all come to the front of the room and let's treat this like almost like a consultation. I've been in situations like that. And what we do is we don't stand at the podium at that point. We have slides. We may go through our slides, but we get much closer with the participants. Sometimes we'll come and sit right down in the audience with them, and we'll say, we have an opportunity here because we have a small group to make this all about you 5 or 6 or 7 people that are here. So as we talk through these issues, let's make this a conversation. Let's talk about what's important to you, and we can make this very, very customized. So there are really positive things about a small group, and you just have to make sure that you call those out and you take advantage of the fact that it's a small group. The other thing about a small group, you don't have to parking lot things. And I don't know if you all know the term parking lot, but many times you'll have a flip chart, and you call that the parking lot. You know, put parking lot, the words parking lot over the top. And essentially, you use that as a place to record issues and items that come up that are not pertinent to your presentation, but that you don't want to lose sight of. So that would be, you know, a list of issues that maybe you would take and you would give it back to, you know, the MGMA staff as, you know, suggestions of something that they want to think about, or suggestions of another educational topic that could be done at a conference or something along those lines. But when you have 10 people, chances are you don't have to do that because you don't have to be as rigid with your time as you do if you have 100, 200, 300 people. It may also allow for one-on-one time, instructor to student, depending on the amount of time you have. I wouldn't say you have 10 people and you have an hour, okay, we're going to just have one-on-one time with each of you and the rest of you are going to sit there. But if you can find a way to give them more heightened attention, I think they'll walk away thinking it was the best session they ever went to, and no one will be talking about the fact that there were 10 people there. If you have a large group, a group of 100, 200, 300, I like to say, think of it as a big city. And what you want to do is you want to help people find a neighborhood in a big city. So what you may do is you may think about breaking the group into smaller segments. I'm going to talk about interaction in a minute, but I'm a firm believer in interaction between attendees, not just between instructor and attendee, but between colleagues and peers sitting in the audience. I think if you have a half hour, you still do interaction. If you have an hour, you do it. If you have a day, you do a lot more. But I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But you can introduce exercises that perhaps you wouldn't do as a full group because it would take too much time to hear from everyone. Or, you know, you may just to, again, break it up and give them a chance to talk to each other, you'll break them down into smaller communities. So if you have 10 people and you decide you want to do introductions or you want to hear from everyone what their biggest issue is related to the topic, you can have 10 people go around a circle and tell you that. If you have 100 people in the room, you certainly can't do that. You will eat up, you know, the entire session and then some. So what you can do is say, I would like you to talk to the person next to you and tell them, what is your biggest issue around the topic we're talking about today? And then they share that, and that lasts, you know, 3 or 4 minutes. Or if you have a little more time and they're sitting in rounds, you can say, share with your group one of the issues that you're dealing with around this topic. And then they're sharing it with the group. Or you can, you know, also give them the charge to help brainstorm solutions for each other. But again, take that big, large group and find some way, somewhere throughout the presentation, to create community for them. And then think about, you know, offering a, sort of what I call a forum-like question, where it's something that they wouldn't feel comfortable sharing with a full group, perhaps, but they feel much more comfortable sharing in a small group of 2, 4, 6. And it might be, you know, one of their challenges, or it might be something that was, you know, that was not a success that they'd like to talk about. So there, again, there are advantages to both, but think about how you can be nimble, again, day of, depending on what you find in the room. So as you start your presentation, think about an opener. Discuss either an incident that relates to the topic, a startling statistic, ask a question. We talked about before, a show of hands. So if you were going to talk about how many group practices use a patient portal, you may say, you know, how many of you have been, you know, using a patient portal for the past, you know, 3 years? Ask people to raise their hand. Then you get a sense of how familiar they are with the patient portal, etc. You can tell a funny story, something that makes them laugh, or you can, you know, say an outrageous statement. The outrageous statement could be something that's totally false. It could be something that you want them to disagree with. So you want to say something where they'd say, no. You know, you could start by saying, you know, no small group practices care about their patients. You know, and of course, you know, that gets everyone's attention, and then, you know, and then of course the speaker would go into why that's not true. An incident that relates to the topic, it could be a story, it could be something that was in the news. I love connecting current events to the types of things that I'm talking about, because what it does is it underscores the fact that these things do happen. It further gives your topic credibility when you can pull something from a headline or something from, you know, a healthcare journal or the like, that shows that what you're talking about really is an issue in group practices or, you know, in healthcare today. I love a startling statistic. I do a lot of talks on multi-generational workforce issues and also working with multi-generational members of associations. And one of the things that I like to start off by saying is, do you plan to be in the workforce in the next 10 years? And people, you know, typically most of them raise their hands. And then I'll say, and do you feel like you understand millennials, both as employees and as customers? And many of them don't raise their hands. And then I'll say, by 2025, in just 10 years, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. And sort of pause and let them think about that. That right there gives them enough of an uh-oh feeling that they're now paying attention to the rest of what I'm saying. And that is literally the first thing I'll start off with. So think about how you might open your session that way. It sets the tone. It's an energizer, and we're going to talk about other energizers throughout the program. But you want to get your audience talking, moving, sharing, engaging. And then storytelling provides you with an opportunity to share your experience and breaks the preoccupation. I'm going to tell you a story, a quick one, about my son. And he was about 2 years old, 2.5 years old. My daughter was probably about 4.5, 5. And we live in Chicago. We spend a lot of time in Michigan in the summer. I had just taken them to the beach, and I was by myself with my kids at the beach. The beach is, you know, long, so we parked. And for anyone that has ever had little children, you know all the things you have to schlep down to the waterfront. It's, you know, sunscreen and floaties and water toys and buckets and on and on and on. We get all the way down there, and my son says, "Mom, I have to go to the bathroom." And I said, "Bud, just go in the lake. It's fine. Just go in the lake." So he turns around and he starts walking towards the lake. I'm putting sunscreen on my daughter, and I hear my son say, "Mom, look at me. I'm going in the lake just like you told me to." And he's got his shorts down around his ankles, and he is going in the lake. Now, why do I tell that story other than the fact that it's kind of funny? It's because I didn't know my audience. I did not know my audience. I was thinking of the way I would interpret those instructions. I know what that means. It means you go down to the lake, you go into the water, you pretend like you're swimming, or you pretend like you're standing there, and you go. What he knew from his little 2.5-year-old mind, because he had just learned potty training, was you pull down your pants, and that's how you go. So after, you know, the laughter died down at the beach, and I stopped being the laughing stock of the Lake Michigan beachfront that day, I really remembered that I had broken my own rule and my own mantra, which is know your audience. So again, if you have a story that you can share that talks about a point that you really want to make, think about doing that. I have been told later that people will never forget the know your audience because of that story. It's not because I said know your audience. It's because they'll never forget the funny story of my son going, you know, into the water at the beach. So introductions. First of all, know when to use introductions. And I'm talking about learner introductions. Let me just back up and talk about your own introduction. You may notice that, may or may not have noticed that at the beginning, I didn't introduce myself right away. I went into a couple of slides first that I wanted you to think about, and I wanted to set the stage, and then I went into my introduction. And the reason I did that is starting all about me, it's frankly not that interesting. It's kind of boring. Everyone's heard someone else's bio. So that's not really the way to start out. You know, it's like going on a blind date, and the first thing the person does is talk all about themselves, right? Kind of a turnoff. And it's also doesn't grip the learner. What you want to do is engage them right out of the gate. So start with something other than your bio. Now, you want to give them your bio eventually because you want them to know you're credible, you've done this before, why they should listen to you. I mean, you really want to build your credibility. So I would put it in second or third slide, but it would not be my first slide to introduce myself. When it comes to participant introductions, I think I talked about this just a little bit, but again, know when to use them. If you are at a conference session, I don't know that I would. I might do a talk to the person next to you and introduce yourself and spend about 3 minutes doing that. Because I am a firm believer in you should build networking into almost any educational session at a conference. People come to meet people, so it gives them an opportunity to meet someone. But I would not do anything more than that at a conference session that's 30, 60, 90 minutes. It's also an episodic event. If you are, if you happen to be teaching a program that is 3 days long and people are going to be seeing themselves and each other over the course of 3 days, you do want them to get to know each other a little bit more. Then you may want to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves. But at a session, at a conference, probably not, unless you're going to do just that one person. I like to ask a whole number of things. So sometimes it's, their name, of course, where they're from, location, business, how long they've been in the profession, what they want from the program. And sometimes if we are doing a longer program and we have a small enough group, we'll go around and we'll ask everyone what they want from the program. We'll put it on a flip chart, but the key is if you're going to do that, you better make sure you get back to that flip chart sometime in the session and that you've covered everything, or at least if you haven't been able to cover something, put it in the parking lot, tell them that you'll pass that off to someone who can address that for them, or give them resources on where to go and where to find their answer. So again, it's almost like that employee suggestion box. It's great to have a suggestion box, but if you're never going to read the suggestions and you don't get back to people on what happens with the suggestions, it actually does more harm than good. So if you're going to ask them what they expect from the program, you need to be able to address that as you wrap up the program. And then I ask them to identify a powerful learning moment. So because I'm training people about training, I want you, as the person in my audience, to think about what was a really amazing educational experience or moment of learning that you've had in your life. And so I ask people to share that with another person, and then I ask for a few volunteers to give us an example. And they're really interesting. I always say that they don't have to be from, university, they don't have to be from school at all. They can be life lessons or a lesson that you learned that you applied to business. So that's what I do, but again, that's because I'm usually wanting to get people in the headspace of thinking about what good learning is, but you may have another question that you'd want to ask people. So easy ways to engage participants. We talked about a show of hands, very, very easy way to engage participants. If you don't have a lot of information on them, ask them a few things, right? Ask them for a show of hands. How many of you have been to this conference before? How many of you have been involved in technology? How many of you are involved in technology on a daily basis at your group practice? Those kinds of things may help your presentation. Quick one-on-one. That's another thing that I mentioned earlier. I believe, and I have done 30-minute presentations. Even in a 30-minute presentation, I give them something to talk to someone else about. I don't let it go more than 5 minutes, but I want people engaged. And if you ever are standing at the front of a room and you feel like the life is being sucked out of the room and you can see people starting to fade, it happens to the best of us, have something like this in your hip pocket. This is one of those hip pocket things where you can say, you know what, I want you to talk to the person sitting next to you and ask them the last time they thought about X. And it could be something related to the last slide you showed, or it could be something related to the next slide you're going to show. It could be, sort of randomly anything. And I wouldn't necessarily preface that with, boy, you people look like you're ready to fall asleep. But I would make note, you've got to always be assessing what's going on in your room. And if you note that they are starting to get low energy, I would throw something in. You will immediately, I promise you, see the energy in the classroom go up the minute they start engaging with each other. I don't know if any of you have heard of TED Talks. The TED Talks started being 18 to 20 minutes. The TED community has done a lot of research on how long adult learners can stay engaged. Their TED Talks are now 12 to 14 with a preference being 12 minutes. There's a reason for that. And remember one of our first slides where we had the infographic about the brain? People cannot pay attention that long. So if you are not offering some intervention every 12 to 15 minutes, something small, something like talk to your neighbor or write this down or getting them to do something, you are losing them. For every minute beyond 15 minutes, you're losing their attention, and they are losing retention. So think about how you can do some very easy things that we're talking about here. Other energizers. Ask a question, ask for a volunteer. Sometimes you bring someone up to the front of the room. That can be fun, funny. Talk to a partner, talk to the table. Icebreakers in groups, role-playing, and simulations. I would say role-playing is really fantastic when someone needs to practice something that is potentially a little bit uncomfortable. And I'll give you a couple of situations where I think role-play can be really effective. One is my company does a course on interviewing, and it's how to, basically the ABCs and the fundamentals of how to interview people for employment. This is not something that comes naturally to a lot of people, and it's also an area that you can get into a lot of legal trouble if you're not doing it right. So in that course, not only do we teach them the laws and give them ideas on how to do it, we have them practice. So we pair them up with someone, and we have someone, come in and be a difficult interview or a quiet interview or, a really polished interview or et cetera, and we have them practice. Another time I would have them practice is another course we do is around having difficult conversations. We always have them practice those difficult conversations. How do you start a difficult conversation? How do you frame it the right way? So those are situations where if we weren't having them practice, we would not be as effective as we could be, because they really need to practice to understand how it's going to feel and to give them a sense of confidence when they go into that next situation. So you may, as you think about the type of course you're offering, you may have a situation in your course where it makes sense for them to role play for a couple of minutes with someone else to get practice on, how do you interview a physician? How do you assure there's a right fit, cultural fit? What are the questions you ask? Those kinds of things. And there are many others. But there are also things that don't lend themselves as much to role play situations. But negotiating contracts, all of those things would really allow and benefit from role play. So here's a few other things, just slides and logistics as we wrap up here. Always have your slides in front of you. When you walk into the MGMA conference session, you will have, the slides will be on a lectern. There'll be a laptop on the lectern. Your slides will already be loaded on it. So you have a couple of options there. What you don't want to do is stand and not look at the screen and not look at your computer and turn around with your back to the audience and look at the screens. You never want your back to the audience. If you put your back to the audience, you've lost their engagement immediately, like turning off a light switch. You've lost them. Don't turn your back on the audience. Not to mention that if you have a mic on, or if you don't have a mic on, they're going to lose the ability to hear you once you turn your head. If you do have a mic on, the mic's probably going to make some noises. You're going to go from being either really well heard to really soft, depending on the way you turn your head. Just don't turn around and put your back to the audience at any point. So what does that mean? It means either you stand at the lectern, or if you're like me and you like getting closer to the audience, you can start the session and do maybe the first couple slides where you kind of know what's on those slides and you don't have to read them, I hope, and your introduction and all of that. You do that on the floor, and then you go up on the stage and you you stand at the podium and do your slides. Another way to do it is to be on the floor and not stand in front of the screen, but stand to the side of the screen. So your body is really facing the audience, and then you're just occasionally looking up at the slides. I'm hoping that by the time you get there next week, you're going to be so comfortable with your presentations that you're not going to be reading those slides anyway. We all know that no one wants to sit in a classroom and watch someone read the PowerPoint slides. So you should be comfortable enough that a mere glance will sort of get you started and get you where you need to go. And again, what we talked about is have as much eye contact and face that audience as much as possible. But again, what you never want to do is turn your back on the audience every 2 minutes to read the bullets on that slide. So think about that. When I get into it, when I'm speaking, the first thing I do when I get into a room, and I understand that because there are many, many sessions in these rooms, they need to have them set a certain way, and they need those laptops to be up on the podium. I get that. I've been in situations like that. And what I do, but that's why I get to the room early, because I want to know what I'm in for. So when I see something, I will either, you know, I know my slides well enough that I don't feel like I need to stand there, and I can speak from the floor and I can walk the room a little bit, or I'll be on the floor when I start, and then I'll go up to the slides later, or I'll stand to the side of the room. But my style, I feel like I'm more connected with the audience the closer I am to them and without a barrier in between us. So, you know, you have to do what feels comfortable for you, but just be aware of not turning your back on them. So flip chart. You may want to do ground rules, learning objectives. It's a great place to put your learning objectives if you have not put them in your slide deck. Any reference points. I also like to use them for quotes. So I'll get in, I like quotes that will emphasize a point I'm trying to make or emphasize a feeling that I'm trying to set, sort of a vibe I'm trying to set in the room. So sometimes I'll get in and I will put a bunch of quotes on flip chart pages, and I will post them all over the room. And that way when people are, you know, get in the room and they're sitting before the presentation starts, they can read the flip chart pages and kind of get a sense of what it's going to be all about. They, you know, again, reinforce the points I'm going to make, etc. And if people start daydreaming, at least they're daydreaming reading something that I want them to read, right? They also can emphasize, you know, a concept. So, you know, you could actually take one of your slides or a statement in a slide that you feel is so important. You could put it on a flip chart or on a couple of flip chart pages and put those around the room as well. Parking lot issues, we talked about that. Headings or main points. If you are soliciting input and writing answers verbatim, so, you know, I want a bunch of ideas on how we solve X, and then you're going to write them on the flip chart, my strong recommendation would be that it is not you that writes, but it is you that facilitates the discussion. So if you plan to do that, have someone else write the flip chart. It is almost impossible to write the flip chart pages and stay connected to your audience and keep the pace moving at the right way. You're usually finishing up writing something while everyone in the room is sitting silently waiting for you to turn around and acknowledge that you're ready for the next idea. And again, what does that do? It means you're turning around and you're putting your back to the audience, something you don't want to do. So even if you had to ask for a volunteer from the audience, I would do that rather than be trying to scribe things on a flip chart unless it's one word that each person is giving. But if you are trying to scribe sentences, have someone else help you with that. And then wrapping up. It's the last impression you'll be giving your audience. Closers can be a story. So again, if you told a story at the beginning, very effective to go back to that story and wrap it up at the end. It can be action planning. So it can be, I want you to write 3 things that you'd like to do when you go back to your facility. It can be a charge or a mission to the group. I would never end with Q&A. You probably want to end with your own content, because if you end with Q&A, you never know how it's going to go, and it could fall flat. You could have that last thing that someone hears from your session be some left-handed question that has nothing to do with the topic, and then it just sort of fizzles. So that's not how you want to leave the class. So before I go to my last slide, I would like to ask you if there are any questions that you have and what your top takeaways are from today's session. What are your top takeaways? What can you think of that you might do differently? It would really help me, and I hope others, to know if there are things that you would do differently. And where I'd like you to answer that for me is in the question box. You'll see in your control panel, it says questions, and you can click on that button and you can just type in any response at all, anything of a question you might have, or what I hope is what you've learned today that you might take away and apply to next week's conference session. So I will wait just a minute and let you type some responses. One person asks, how long should you allow for Q&A? And I would say per hour, at least 10 minutes. It kind of depends on how much you think the attendees need, will ask. Some groups are very chatty, some aren't, some are very quiet. But I would definitely always have at least 10 minutes. And I would be careful about allowing a lot of questions during the session. I think it's great to have questions come up here and there during a session if you can address them quickly and move on. But I've also seen presenters get way, way, way out in the woods on a particular question, and they lose track of time, and then before they know it, the session time is over and they haven't gotten through their slides. Never want that to happen. That's actually kind of embarrassing when it happens, and you also may have a really great conclusion that you want people to be hearing. It might be some really salient points at the end that they don't have the opportunity to hear because you've run out of time. So again, please take to the screen with takeaways. I had someone say my biggest takeaway was inserting some activity every 12 to 14 minutes. Yes, thank you, Rebecca. I really agree with that. I really believe that one quick activity for every 12 to 14 minutes is what you should be thinking of. And again, remember that if we don't do that, we are going to lose the audience every minute past them. Because once you do that activity, you can start the clock again. Then you've got another 12 to 14 minutes and you know they're going to be engaged. So I'm glad you took that away, and I do hope that you will try that next week when you do your session. I had another person say my biggest takeaway is really to watch the energy in the room. And that's great. I'm glad to hear that you are going to be paying attention to that, because really it is, at the end of the day, all about the learners. And we want to make sure that they are really paying attention. And that if they're not, we have a few things in our hip pocket to use in case we need to. Any other questions? Takeaways? Can I get a couple other takeaways? One person said they are going to try the show of hands at the beginning to get more demographic information out of the room, because they don't feel that they're going to know who those people are going in. I think that's a great idea. Again, there's many ways to do that, but a show of hands is a really good way to do it. So with that, I will leave you with some closing thoughts. Your closing statement should be much more effective than, and that's all I have today. When people say, well, that's all I've got, that's all I have today, it really does kind of make me cringe. Because first of all, it's not true. They have a lot more that they can offer, and they planned to have that much. It's not that they are ill-informed and that they can't offer more. So it's sort of a negative and a downer way to end a message. But, doing the what were your top takeaways, I find is a really great way to do two things. One is it allows for everyone to hear in the classroom what some of the really important points were. So usually those things that really resonated with attendees are the things that will come out. So it's one more chance for them to hear those items, but from someone else's voice, which is very powerful. it also leaves your attendees with the mental image and thought that they got takeaways from that session. So often when conference attendees go back to their offices, they're thinking, well, what did I really get out of that conference? You know, it was great, it was fun, I saw a lot of people, but did I have takeaways? When you specifically call out takeaways from your presentation, it really allows that idea to be cemented in the attendee's mind. Ah, I got takeaways from this. And they were to do this, and to do this, and to do this. So again, I think it's a really powerful way to end, is really to talk about what are the takeaways. And then connecting the dots. So, you know, there's content and there's context. What we need to do, and what you certainly need to do as educators next week, is to not only present content, but to lay it into the right context. And that has to do with what we talked about at the beginning. Know your audience. Know your audience. If you are talking about a particular practice, you may say, this works great in practices all throughout the United States. This works great in pediatric group practices as well as geriatric group practices. So again, find ways to connect the dot from your content to the context that that person may be working in, thinking about, operating in, etc., and allow all of that to come full circle as you close your program. With that, I would like to wish you all the best in your presentations next week. I really hope that you've taken a few things away from this today that are helpful to you. If any of you would like me to attend your session next week and even provide you some one-on-one afterward, I'm happy to do that. I've offered that to the other groups as well, and I've had a few takers. But if not, I hope to see you there. I'll be there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and look forward to enjoying the conference with you. So best of luck, and thanks for dialing in today. Take care. Safe travels.